the Celestial Archive wasn't just a building. It was a monument to everything the galaxy couldn't explain. Floating in the void between star systems, this massive structure held artifacts that had puzzled civilizations for thousands of years. Some rooms contained machines that hummed with unknown power. Others held crystals that changed color based on thoughts. And in Chamber 7, sitting alone in the center of an otherwise empty room, was the dragon egg. The egg was enormous, roughly the size of a small vehicle. Its surface was black as midnight, covered in scales that seemed to drink in every photon of light that touched it. No matter how bright the lights in the chamber were, the egg remained dark, as if it existed in its own private shadow. When you stood near it, you could feel a strange coldness radiating from its surface, not the cold of ice, but something deeper, older. For 500 years, the egg had been a challenge that nobody could solve. It had become something of a legend across the known galaxy. Species from every corner of space had come to try their hand at hatching it. The Krithani, a warrior race known for their mastery of fire and energy, had built special plasma forges. They wrapped the egg in flames hot enough to melt steel, thinking that perhaps it needed extreme heat to wake whatever was inside. The egg remained unchanged, not even warming to the touch. The Veshta, a deeply spiritual people who believed in the power of sound and vibration, had sent their best singers. For weeks, they filled Chamber 7 with harmonious chants, ancient songs of resurrection that had supposedly brought life back to dying stars. The egg sat silent, offering no response. The scholarly Oolith, beings of pure logic and scientific precision, had spent decades mapping every single molecule of the egg's structure. They had theories upon theories, equations that filled entire libraries, but not a single one brought them closer to understanding how to hatch it. Eventually, most gave up. The egg became just another permanent fixture of the archive, something to show visitors, a reminder that even with all the galaxy's combined knowledge, some mysteries remained unsolved. Jack Cooper had never even heard of the dragon egg when he took the job. He was 28 years old, from a small town in Montana, and had been traveling through space for the past 3 years doing odd jobs on various stations and ships. When he saw the posting for custodial work at the Celestial Archive, he applied without thinking much about it. The pay was decent, the work seemed straightforward, and honestly, he was getting tired of moving around so much. His first day started like any other job. Tolves, his supervisor, met him at the entrance. Tolves was a Greshik, a species with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. He was patient and kind, walking Jack through the facility's layout. The archive was massive, with hundreds of chambers spread across dozens of levels. Each area had specific environmental requirements. Some needed to be kept at freezing temperatures. Others required specific atmospheric compositions. A few even had to maintain precise gravitational fields. Humans have a knack for this kind of work, Tolves explained as they walked through the corridors. Your species has good instincts for maintaining complex systems. Plus, you can handle a wider range of environments than most species without needing special equipment. Jack nodded, making mental notes about which areas needed daily checks and which were on weekly schedules. The work itself wasn't complicated. Monitor the readouts, adjust settings when needed, clean the filters, keep everything running smoothly. He'd done similar work on space stations before. By his 3rd day, Jack had fallen into a comfortable routine. He'd start at the top levels and work his way down, checking systems, making minor repairs, and keeping the whole place running. The archive was quiet most days. Scientists came and went, usually too absorbed in their research to notice the cleaning crew. Jack didn't mind. He'd always preferred working alone anyway. On his 5th day, Jack discovered Chamber 7 purely by accident. He'd finished his morning rounds early and had about 30 minutes before his lunch break officially ended. Usually, he'd eat in the staff cafeteria, a cramped room that smelled like recycled air and heated protein packs. But that day, he decided to explore a bit. He'd noticed a corridor he hadn't walked down yet, and his curiosity got the better of him. The door to Chamber 7 was larger than most others, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb sound. It slid open silently when he approached. The room beyond was enormous and almost completely empty. No equipment lined the walls. No scientists bustled about with instruments. Just open space and, in the very center, the egg. Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, staring. He'd seen plenty of strange things in his travels, but something about the egg caught his attention. It was beautiful in a haunting way, like a piece of frozen night sky given form. He stepped inside, and the door whispered shut behind him. The chamber had a bench along one wall, probably left there centuries ago for observers. Jack sat down, unpacked his lunch, and just looked at the egg. He'd brought leftovers from the night before, spaghetti and meatballs that he'd cooked in his small quarters. The archive's kitchen facilities were surprisingly good. He'd also grabbed some garlic bread from the cafeteria and had his thermos of coffee. As he ate, the silence of the chamber felt almost companionable. Jack had grown up as an only child in a rural area. He was used to silence, comfortable with it even. But he'd also developed a habit over the years of talking to himself when he was alone. It helped him think through problems, organize his thoughts. "Not bad for archive food," he said out loud, twirling some spaghetti on his fork. His voice echoed slightly in the empty space. He glanced at the egg. "You probably don't know what spaghetti is, huh? It's this pasta from Earth. Italy, specifically. My mom used to make it every Sunday." He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "I've got this sister, Katie. She's getting married next month. Asked me to come back to Earth for the wedding. I don't know if I can swing it though. The travel costs from out here are insane, and I just started this job." He sipped his coffee. "She's marrying this guy, Tom. He's alright, I guess. Bit boring for my taste, but Katie seems happy. That's what matters, right?" Jack continued eating, occasionally speaking his thoughts aloud. He talked about the broken recycler on level 3 that was giving him trouble. About how he'd never expected to end up working as a janitor in space. About how Earth felt both incredibly far away and sometimes too close, depending on his mood. He didn't notice the change at first. The crack was hairline thin, barely visible against the dark scales. It appeared near the top of the egg, a slight silver line that caught the light differently than the rest of the surface. Jack finished his coffee, packed up his containers, and stood to leave. "Well, this was nice," he said to the empty chamber, to the egg. "Quiet. I might eat lunch here again, if that's okay with you." He walked out, the door closing behind him, completely unaware that something impossible had just happened. Something that 500 years of effort, technology, and knowledge had failed to achieve. The egg, the legend, the unsolvable mystery, had finally begun to crack. Dr. Rebecca Shale had been studying the dragon egg for 17 years. Every Monday morning, she arrived at Chamber 7 at exactly 7 o'clock to perform her weekly monitoring routine. She'd measure the temperature, check the radiation levels, scan for any molecular changes, and document everything in meticulous detail. In 17 years, nothing had ever changed. The egg remained exactly as it had been for the previous 483 years before she'd even started her work. That Monday started like every other. Rebecca walked through the archive's corridors with her equipment case, nodding to the few early morning staff members she passed. She entered Chamber 7, set down her case, and pulled out her scanning device. She was halfway through her usual checklist when she noticed something that made her freeze. A crack. A single, thin line running along the egg's surface. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her brain struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. Then her training kicked in. She pulled out her communicator with shaking hands and pressed the emergency alert. Within seconds, alarms were screaming throughout the entire facility. The response was immediate and chaotic. Security teams arrived first, sealing off the chamber. Then came the scientists, dozens of them, rushing from their labs and quarters. The archives director, a tall being named Corval who'd held the position for 60 years, arrived within minutes. Chamber 7, which had been silent and empty for centuries, suddenly became the most crowded room in the facility. "Nobody touch it," Corval ordered, his voice cutting through the excited chatter. "Rebecca, what happened? What did you do?" "Nothing," she said, still staring at the crack. "I walked in and it was like this. I haven't even approached it yet." "Check the security recordings," someone shouted. "Find out when this happened." A technician pulled up the footage on a portable screen. They watched the recordings from the past 24 hours at high speed. The chamber remained empty most of the time. Then, around midday the previous day, the door opened. A human walked in, sat down, and appeared to eat lunch. He stayed for maybe 30 minutes, then left. About an hour after he departed, the crack appeared. "Go back," Corval said. "Play that section again." Slowly. They watched Jack Cooper enter the chamber, sit on the bench, unpack his meal, and eat. He seemed to be talking, though the security cameras didn't record audio in most chambers. He looked relaxed, casual, like he was just having lunch in a pleasant spot. Nothing about his behavior seemed unusual or threatening. "Who is that?" Corval demanded. "One of the new custodial staff," Tolves said, pushing through the crowd. "His name is Jack Cooper. He's human. Started working here less than a week ago." "Find him. Now." and seal this chamber. Nobody enters or exits until we understand what happened. Jack was in the middle of replacing an air filter on level 9 when 4 security officers surrounded him. They weren't aggressive, but they weren't friendly either. One of them, a massive creature with armor-like skin, simply said, "You need to come with us." "Did I do something wrong?" Jack asked, genuinely confused. "Is this about the recycler? Because I left a note saying it needs parts from." "Just come with us." They brought him to a small room with white walls and a single table. Jack had seen enough movies to recognize an interrogation room when he saw one. His confusion was rapidly turning into worry. What could he have possibly done to end up here? Corval entered the room, followed by Rebecca and several other officials Jack didn't recognize. They all looked at him with expressions ranging from suspicion to barely contained anger. "Mr. Cooper," Corval began, his voice cold and formal. "Yesterday, you entered Chamber 7. Why?" "Chamber 7? Jack thought for a moment. "Oh, the room with the big egg? I ate lunch there. The door was open, so I figured it was okay. Was it not? I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody told me it was off limits." "What did you do to the egg?" "Do to it? Nothing. I just sat on the bench and ate my lunch. I didn't even touch it. It was like 20 feet away from me." "The egg has developed a crack," Rebecca said, leaning forward. "After 500 years of being perfectly intact, you spend 30 minutes in that chamber and it cracks. You expect us to believe that's a coincidence?" Jack's eyes widened. "It cracked? Is that good or bad? I mean, isn't the whole point that everyone's been trying to hatch it?" "Did you use any technology?" one of the Krithani representatives demanded. He was a fierce-looking being with reddish skin and eyes that seemed to glow. "Some human device? A weapon perhaps?" "A weapon? I had a fork. And a thermos. That's it." "Perhaps your species emits some radiation we're unaware of," suggested an Oolith scholar. "We need to run tests. Full biological scans, genetic sequencing, chemical analysis." "Hold on," Jack interrupted. "Tests? What kind of tests? And why would I damage the egg anyway? I didn't even know what it was. I thought it was just some kind of display piece." The interrogation continued for hours. They asked him the same questions over and over, clearly hoping he'd slip up and reveal something. Jack told them the truth repeatedly. He'd eaten spaghetti. He'd drunk coffee. He'd talked to himself like he always did. That was it. Nothing more. The Krithani representative was particularly aggressive. "If a human has somehow stolen this achievement from the galaxy through trickery or sabotage, there will be severe consequences. My people have waited centuries for the dragon to emerge. If you've damaged it..." "I didn't damage anything," Jack said, his frustration finally breaking through. "I sat on a bench and ate lunch. That's all. I don't know why the egg cracked, but it had nothing to do with me." They kept him in the detention room overnight. Jack barely slept, lying on the uncomfortable cot and wondering how eating lunch had turned into an interstellar incident. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. Had he done something without realizing it? Bumped into something? Set off some kind of sensor? But no, he'd been careful. He just sat there. The next morning, everything changed. Jack was jolted awake by alarms. Different alarms than before, louder, more urgent. Through the walls, he could hear shouting, running footsteps, chaos. A guard opened his door, looking panicked. "It's hatching," the guard said. "Right now. The egg is hatching." They rushed him through the corridors. Jack could barely keep up, his mind racing. What did this mean? Would they blame him for that too? When they reached Chamber 7, the door was already open. Inside, a crowd had gathered, but they were all pressed against the walls, keeping their distance from the center of the room. The egg had split completely. Pieces of the dark shell lay scattered across the floor. And standing among the debris was a creature unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It was about the size of a large dog, maybe a little bigger. Its body was covered in scales that shifted between deep black and dark blue, shimmering like oil on water. It had 4 legs, a long tail, and wings that were still folded against its sides, looking too small and fragile for flight. Its head was angular, with large eyes that seemed to hold an impossible depth of intelligence. The creature looked at the assembled crowd of scientists, officials, and guards. Its mouth opened. The sound that came out was indescribable, part wail, part cry, part something that had no human comparison. The noise was so intense that the observation windows cracked, spiderwebbing with fractures. People covered their ears. Some stumbled backward. The creature kept crying, its distress palpable. "Tranquilize it," someone shouted. "No, you'll hurt it. It's going to bring down the chamber." In the chaos, Jack acted on instinct. He pushed through the crowd and walked toward the creature. People grabbed at him, trying to pull him back, but he shrugged them off. He didn't know why he was doing this. He just knew, somehow, that the creature was scared. "Hey," he said softly, approaching slowly. "Hey, it's okay. You're okay." The moment Jack spoke, the creature stopped wailing. Its head turned toward him, those deep eyes focusing on his face. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of settling debris. Everyone held their breath. The creature made a small sound, softer this time, almost questioning. Then it moved. Its steps were unsteady, like a newborn learning to walk. It stumbled over pieces of eggshell, nearly fell, caught itself, and kept coming toward Jack. Jack knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. "That's it. You're doing good." The creature reached him and pressed its scaled head against Jack's chest. It made a sound like a purr mixed with distant thunder. Then, right there in front of dozens of witnesses, the dragon curled up on Jack's feet and fell asleep, its breathing deep and peaceful. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all just stared at the impossible scene before them, a human janitor and a newborn dragon, together in the center of a mystery that had just become infinitely more complicated. The first time they tried to separate Jack from the dragon was 3 hours after it hatched. The creature had been sleeping peacefully on his feet, and Jack's legs were starting to go numb. A team of xenobiologists wanted to move the dragon to a specialized containment area where they could monitor its vital signs and begin their research. It seemed reasonable enough. "We'll just be a few minutes," one of them assured Jack. "We need to run some basic health scans." The moment they tried to lift the dragon, it woke up. Its eyes snapped open, and before anyone could react, a wave of energy pulsed outward from its body. Every electronic device within 50 feet immediately died. Tablets went black. Scanning equipment sparked and smoked. The lights in Chamber 7 flickered and went out, leaving them in emergency lighting. The dragon started that horrible wailing sound again, thrashing in the scientist's arms. "Put it down." Jack shouted over the noise. "You're scaring it." The scientist set the dragon back on the floor. It immediately scrambled back to Jack, pressing against his legs, and the wailing stopped. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of ruined equipment crackling and popping as it cooled. "Well," Corval said quietly, surveying the damage. "That's unfortunate." Jack looked down at the dragon. It was staring up at him with those impossibly deep eyes, making small chirping sounds. Without really thinking about it, he reached down and scratched behind what he assumed were its ears. The dragon leaned into the touch, and that purring thunder sound started up again. "I think I'm stuck with it," Jack said. "Or it's stuck with me. One of those." "We need to call it something," Rebecca said, pulling out a backup tablet that had been outside the blast radius. "For the records, if nothing else." Jack thought for a moment, looking at the dark scales that seemed to hold shadows in them. "Ash," he said. "We'll call it Ash." The name seemed to fit. Ash made a pleased sound, as if approving of the choice. Over the next few days, the situation became increasingly complicated. Ash refused to eat anything unless Jack was present. The archive's nutritional experts prepared elaborate meals based on what they theorized a young dragon might need, exotic meats and mineral supplements, but Ash wouldn't touch any of it. Only when Jack sat down next to the food bowls and encouraged the dragon would Ash eat, and even then, it kept one eye on Jack the whole time. Sleep was another issue. Ash would only sleep if Jack was in the room, preferably within touching distance. The archive set up a cot in Chamber 7 for Jack, but this created a new problem. Jack couldn't perform his actual job. He couldn't leave to maintain the environmental systems or check on the equipment. Other staff had to cover his duties, and they weren't happy about it. "This is unsustainable," Tolvest told Corval during one of their many emergency meetings. "We have a facility to run. We can't have one of our maintenance workers permanently stationed in Chamber 7 because a dragon has attachment issues." "I'm open to suggestions," Corval replied dryly. The scientific community went into overdrive trying to understand what made Jack special. Teams of researchers descended on the archive from across the galaxy, all wanting to study this unprecedented phenomenon. The prevailing theory was that humans must emit some unique chemical or biological signature that the dragon recognized and bonded with. They tested everything. Jack provided samples of his breath, captured in special containers and analyzed molecule by molecule. They collected his sweat, his hair, even samples of his skin cells. They asked him to describe his diet in excruciating detail, then replicated his lunch from that first day with perfect accuracy. They placed the identical meal near Ash. The dragon sniffed it once and walked away, completely disinterested. Maybe it's not the food itself, one researcher suggested. Maybe it's something in how the food is prepared. The combination of scents. They brought in professional chefs, both human and alien, to recreate the meal using different techniques. Ash ignored all of it. The dragon would only eat the regular food the archive provided, and only when Jack was there. Next, they brought in other humans. The archive put out a call, and 12 humans from various parts of the sector volunteered to come and interact with Ash. They ranged in age from 19 to 63, different backgrounds, different personalities. Each one spent time in Chamber 7, trying to engage with the dragon. Ash treated them all the same, with complete indifference. The dragon would watch them politely enough, but showed no interest in approaching them or interacting. The moment Jack entered the room, though, Ash would perk up, make happy chirping sounds, and bound over to him like an excited puppy. Jack found the whole situation both flattering and deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't anyone special. He was just a guy who'd taken a job cleaning air filters and checking temperature gauges. Now he had scientists following him around, analyzing everything he did, treating him like he was some kind of key to a cosmic mystery. Rebecca spent hours reviewing the security footage from that first day. While other scientists focused on trying to identify what made Jack unique, she took a different approach. She watched the footage over and over, not looking at Jack, but trying to understand the situation from the egg's perspective. On her 47th viewing, she noticed something. Jack's mouth was moving almost the entire time he was in the chamber. He was talking. Not to anyone in particular, just talking. The security system didn't record audio in most chambers, a privacy measure that now seemed frustratingly short-sighted. Rebecca pulled up Jack's file, read through his background, and made some notes. She found Jack in Chamber 7 late one evening. He was sitting on his cot reading a book on his tablet while Ash slept nearby, the dragon's head resting on Jack's foot. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said quietly, not wanting to wake Ash. "Sure," Jack said, setting down the tablet. "That first day, when you had lunch in here. You were talking. What were you saying?" Jack looked embarrassed. "Oh. Yeah, I do that sometimes. Talk to myself. It's just a habit. Helps me think." "What specifically were you talking about? Can you remember?" Jack thought back. "Just normal stuff, I guess. I talked about the food. Mentioned my sister's wedding coming up. The broken recycler that was giving me trouble." "Why?" Rebecca's eyes lit up. "You were just talking. Having a conversation, essentially. Not performing a ritual or reciting something formal." "Yeah, I mean, it's an egg. I didn't think it could hear me." "But what if it could?" Rebecca said, her voice getting excited. "What if it had been conscious all this time, aware, listening, waiting?" She left Chamber 7 quickly, heading for the archive's historical database. While other scientists had focused on technical specifications and biological analyses, the archive also housed something else: stories. Myths and legends from thousands of cultures across hundreds of worlds. This section of the database was rarely used. Most modern scientists considered it irrelevant, superstition rather than fact. Rebecca started searching for any references to dragons. The database returned thousands of results. She spent the entire night reading, her eyes growing wider as she found pattern after pattern. The ancient Terran cultures had stories about dragons. In nearly every one, dragons weren't distant, godlike creatures to be worshipped from afar. They were companions. They lived alongside humans, shared their homes, their fires. There were stories of dragon riders, of dragons who listened to their bonded partners' troubles and joys. The Velkari people, who'd gone extinct 3,000 years ago, had similar tales. Their dragons were described as friends who chose their companions carefully, based not on power or wealth, but on something the old texts called harmony of spirit. Even the Krithani, who now viewed dragons as potential weapons of war, had ancient legends that told a different story. Their oldest texts described dragons as teachers and companions, beings who shared knowledge and wisdom through conversation and connection. Every culture that had encountered dragons described the same thing: a bond based not on domination or worthiness, but on simple companionship. On talking and listening. On treating the dragon as a person, not a possession. Rebecca sat back in her chair as the sun began to rise outside the archive, casting long shadows through the windows. The galaxy had spent 500 years trying to prove itself worthy of the dragon. They'd demonstrated their power with plasma forges. They'd shown their devotion with sacred charts. They'd displayed their intelligence with detailed analyses. But Jack had done none of that. He'd just sat down, eaten his lunch, and talked about his day. He treated the egg not as a test to pass or a puzzle to solve, but as someone to share a quiet moment with. He'd been genuine, unguarded, simply himself. "We've been asking the wrong question," Rebecca muttered to herself. "It was never about what makes Jack special. It's about what the rest of us forgot." She grabbed her tablet and headed back to Chamber 7. Jack was awake, trying to do stretches without disturbing the still sleeping Ash. Rebecca started explaining her theory, showing him the ancient texts, the patterns she'd found. As she talked, Jack listened with growing understanding. "So you're saying," he said slowly, "that everyone's been treating this like a challenge to overcome. But maybe the egg was just lonely? Waiting for someone to talk to it like a friend." "Exactly," Rebecca said. "The dragon didn't choose you because you're human or because of your biology. It chose you because you were the first person in 500 years to simply be present with it. To share something of yourself without wanting anything in return." Jack looked down at Ash, who was starting to wake up, yawning to reveal rows of tiny, sharp teeth. "That's kind of sad when you think about it." "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "It is." The news traveled fast. Within 48 hours of Ash's hatching, every major government and organization in the galaxy knew that a human had accomplished what 500 years of effort had failed to achieve. The communication channels at the Celestial Archive were flooded with inquiries, demands for information, and requests for interviews. By the end of the week, ships were arriving from across known space, all wanting to see the dragon and the human who'd hatched it. Humanity as a species had only joined galactic society about 70 years ago. They were still considered newcomers, a young race with interesting potential but no real power or influence. Most established species viewed humans as somewhat naive, enthusiastic but ultimately unremarkable. They were good at adaptable work, decent traders, and showed promise in certain technical fields, but they weren't considered important players in galactic politics. That changed overnight. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know everything about humans. What made them special? Did they all have this ability to bond with ancient creatures, or was it just some humans? Could this ability be learned, taught, replicated? The questions came from every direction, and behind many of them lurked a more uncomfortable truth. If humans could do this, what else might they be capable of? The Krithani Empire was the first to make an official demand. A delegation of 5 high-ranking officials arrived at the archive, their ship bristling with weapons as a not-so-subtle reminder of their military might. Their leader, a scarred veteran named General Vokrith, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The dragon is a weapon of legend," he announced during an emergency council meeting at the archive. "According to our ancient texts, dragons were companions to our greatest warriors. This creature should be in Krithani custody, where it can be properly trained and utilized." Utilized? Jack spoke up from where he sat in the corner of the meeting room. Ash was curled at his feet, now the size of a large wolf and still growing. "You're talking about Ash like it's a piece of equipment." Vokrith turned his glowing eyes toward Jack. "You are the human. You have done your species a service by awakening the dragon, and for that, you will be compensated. But you cannot possibly understand the significance of what has hatched. The dragon must be placed in proper hands." Before Jack could respond, another voice cut in. "The Krithani have no more claim to this dragon than anyone else." A Veshtar representative stood, her robes flowing around her like water. "Our monastery has maintained the sacred chants of dragon calling for 2,000 years. We are the spiritual guardians of dragon lore. The creature should be brought to our temple world, where it can be raised in proper reverence." Reverence. An Oolith scholar stood now, his crystalline body refracting the room's light. "This is a once-in-an-epoch opportunity for scientific study. The dragon should be housed at our academy, where we have the facilities and expertise to properly document its development, abilities, and nature. Spiritual mysticism and military posturing have no place in serious research." The room erupted into arguments. Representatives from a dozen different species all began talking at once, each claiming they had the best reason to take custody of Ash. Some offered Jack money, some offered honor and prestige, and some, like the Krithani, made it clear that their requests were really demands backed by the implicit threat of force. Jack felt completely overwhelmed. He'd grown up in a small town where the biggest political drama was arguments over the school board budget. Now he was sitting in a room full of alien ambassadors arguing over the fate of a dragon he'd accidentally bonded with by eating lunch in the wrong place. None of this made any sense. A hand touched his shoulder. Jack looked up to see a young woman about his age, maybe a bit younger. She had warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the simple uniform of an archive assistant. "Come with me," she whispered. "You look like you need a break." Jack carefully stood, trying not to disturb Ash, but the dragon immediately woke and followed him. Nobody seemed to notice them slip out of the meeting room. The arguments had reached a fever pitch, with several representatives now standing and shouting at each other. The woman led Jack to a small office tucked away in a quiet corridor. "I'm Claire," she said once the door was closed, muffling the distant sounds of the debate. "I'm one of the archivists here. I work in the historical documents section, usually. Nothing exciting." "Nice to meet you," Jack said, sinking into a chair. Ash settled beside him, resting its head on his knee. "Thanks for the rescue. I was about 2 minutes away from having a complete breakdown in there." Claire smiled sympathetically. "They're going to keep doing this, you know. More ships are arriving every day. Some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy are coming here, and they all want the same thing. They want Ash. They want what Ash represents. Power, knowledge, prestige. Take your pick." Claire sat down across from him. "I've been reading the old texts, the ones Dr. Shale has been studying. The stories about dragons. Do you know what I found interesting?" "What?" "In all of them, across every culture, the dragons always chose their companions. It was never the other way around. People didn't capture dragons or claim them. The dragons decided who they wanted to be with, and that was that. Nobody could force it." Jack scratched Ash behind the ears, and the dragon made that pleased rumbling sound. "So what happens now? I can't keep living in Chamber 7. I have a life, or at least I had one before all this started." "I don't know," Claire admitted. "But I do know that nobody in that meeting room is thinking about what's best for you or Ash. They're all thinking about what they want." Over the next 2 weeks, the situation deteriorated. More delegations arrived. The archive was running out of rooms to house all the visiting officials. Protests broke out on several worlds, with different factions demanding that their government secure the dragon for their people. There were rumors of ships positioning themselves near the archive, not quite threatening but clearly present. Through it all, Ash kept growing and changing. The dragon was now the size of a small horse, its scales darkening to a deep midnight blue. But more concerning were the abilities it was displaying. Jack woke up one morning to find Ash had somehow gotten into his quarters despite the locked door. When he asked how, Ash simply tilted its head and then vanished, reappearing on the other side of the room in the blink of an eye. Teleportation. The dragon could teleport. Then there was the incident with the walls. A researcher tried to take a blood sample without Jack's permission. Ash growled, and suddenly the researcher's hand passed through the dragon's body like it wasn't there. Ash had somehow made itself intangible, its physical form shifting into something else momentarily. The technology disruption was getting worse too. Whenever Ash was agitated or upset, electronics near it would fail. The archive's technical staff started keeping backup systems for the backup systems, and they installed hardened shielding in several critical areas. The final confrontation came during what was supposed to be a diplomatic council meeting. Representatives from 30 different governments and organizations packed into the archive's main assembly hall. Jack was required to attend with Ash at his side. The dragon was now too large to be comfortable in most rooms, its wings occasionally knocking over furniture. General Vokrith stood at the center of the room, his voice booming. "We have discussed this matter for weeks, and still there is no resolution. Meanwhile, the human keeps the dragon like a pet, wasting its potential. This is unacceptable. The Krithani Empire formally demands custody of the dragon, effective immediately." The Veshtar refused this demand, the monastery representative countered. As does the Olith Academy. And the Covenant of Free Worlds. The argument started again, louder this time, angrier. Jack felt Ash tense beside him. The dragon's scales were starting to shimmer strangely, and he could feel a pressure building in the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. "Enough." Vokritha's voice cut through the chaos. He pulled a weapon from his belt, a sleek energy pistol. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it where everyone could see. "If there can be no agreement, then there must be action. The dragon comes with us now or there will be consequences." The room went deathly silent. Several security personnel reached for their own weapons. Jack felt his heart racing. This was about to turn into a shooting match, and he and Ash were at the center of it. Then Ash did something nobody expected. The dragon stood, drawing itself up to its full height. Its eyes began to glow with an inner light. And then, without warning, something flooded into Jack's mind. Not words exactly, but feelings, emotions so intense they felt like physical sensations. And looking around the room, he realized everyone else was experiencing it too. Loneliness. Deep, aching loneliness that stretched across centuries. The awareness of being trapped, conscious but unable to move, to speak, to interact with the world. 500 years of watching beings approach with greed in their hearts, with thoughts of power and control, none of them seeing the creature inside the egg as a person deserving of basic kindness or consideration. The sadness was overwhelming. Jack felt tears streaming down his face. Around the room, others were crying too. The Veshtar representative had sunk to her knees. Several Olith scholars were making sounds of distress. And General Vokrith, the fierce warrior who'd been ready to use force moments ago, stood frozen with his weapon hanging limply at his side, tears tracking down his scarred face. The emotion slowly faded, leaving everyone shaken. Ash settled back down beside Jack, looking exhausted. The silence in the room was complete. Finally, Claire spoke up from where she'd been sitting in the back. "Maybe," she said quietly, "we should start asking what the dragon wants, instead of fighting over who gets to own it." The emotional experience Ash had shared changed everything. The meeting hall cleared out slowly, with beings who'd been ready to fight just moments before now looking shaken and uncertain. General Vokrith left without another word, his weapon holstered. The monastery representatives departed quietly, whispering prayers. Even the most aggressive delegations seemed to have lost their appetite for confrontation. But the problem remained: what happened next? The Archive's Leadership Council went into closed sessions that stretched for days. Jack wasn't invited to most of these meetings, which frustrated him. They were deciding his future, Ash's future, and he wasn't even in the room. He spent those days in Chamber 7, which had been expanded to accommodate Ash's growing size. The dragon was now large enough that Jack could sit comfortably between its front legs, leaning back against its chest like a living backrest. "What do you want?" Jack asked Ash during one of these quiet moments. "If you could choose, what would you do?" Ash made a low rumbling sound and shifted slightly, wrapping one wing partially around Jack like a blanket. The dragon couldn't speak in words, at least not yet, but Jack was getting better at reading its body language and the emotions it sometimes projected. Right now, Ash seemed content, but also restless. Like it wanted something more than this chamber, these walls. Claire visited daily, bringing Jack meals and updates when she could. "The debate is intense," she told him one evening. "Some council members are citing ancient archive laws. Any artifact or item of historical significance that comes into archive custody is supposed to remain here for study and preservation." "Ash isn't an artifact," Jack said firmly. "You can't preserve a living being in a museum." Dr. Shale has been making that exact argument. She's saying that forcing Ash to stay here against its will, or forcing you to stay because Ash won't leave without you, is essentially slavery. Both of you would be prisoners. So what's the other side saying? That the dragon is too important, too dangerous potentially, to just let leave. That humanity hasn't proven itself responsible enough to handle something this significant. Claire looked uncomfortable. There's also concern about precedent. If the archive lets you leave with Ash, what happens when the next major discovery is made? They worry about losing control. "Control," Jack muttered. "It always comes back to control." After 5 days of deliberation, Corval summoned Jack to present the council's decision. Jack walked into the meeting room with Ash at his side. The dragon had to duck to fit through the doorway now, and its tail stretched nearly 12 feet behind it. "Mr. Cooper," Corval began formally, "the council has reached a compromise regarding your situation and that of the dragon Ash." Jack waited, trying not to show how nervous he felt. "The dragon will remain at the Celestial Archive, where it can be properly studied and monitored. However, we recognize the unique bond between you and the creature. Therefore, we are offering you a permanent position as the dragon's official liaison and caretaker. You would receive a substantial salary, comfortable quarters here at the archive, and full access to our facilities. You would essentially be Ash's guardian and primary handler." It was a generous offer, Jack had to admit. Financial security, a purpose, a place to live. Many people would jump at this opportunity. But as Corval spoke, Jack felt Ash tense beside him. The dragon's scales rippled with what Jack had learned to recognize as distress. "No," Jack said. The room went silent. Corval's expression showed genuine surprise. "No?" "With respect, no. I can't accept that offer. Mr. Cooper, Perhaps you don't understand the opportunity we're presenting. The salary alone would be more than you could earn in any other position. You would be working with the galaxy's finest researchers, contributing to knowledge that could. Ash has already spent 500 years in a chamber, Jack interrupted. 500 years of walls and sensors and being studied. That's not what it chose me for. That's not what either of us wants. Then what do you want? Another council member asked, frustration evident in their voice. Jack took a deep breath. This was the moment. He'd been thinking about this for days, but saying it out loud still felt terrifying. I want to go home. Back to Earth. And I want to take Ash with me. The room erupted in objections. Impossible. The dragon is too valuable. You can't just take it to an unmonitored world. Humanity doesn't have the infrastructure to. Corval held up a hand for silence. Mr. Cooper, be reasonable. Earth is a developing world. You don't have the facilities to care for a dragon, to study it, to protect it if necessary. What you're suggesting is irresponsible. What's irresponsible is keeping a living, thinking being locked up because you want to study it, Jack shot back. Ash isn't a specimen. It's a person. And it chose me because I treated it like one. You want to go right back to seeing it as a thing to be controlled and observed. Before anyone could respond, Ash moved. The dragon stepped forward, positioning itself between Jack and the council. Then that pressure filled the air again, the one that preceded Ash's emotional projections. But this time was different. Images flooded everyone's minds. Not emotions, but actual visual memories. Jack's memories. The council members gasped as they saw through Jack's eyes, felt what he felt. They saw Earth. The small town in Montana where Jack grew up, mountains rising in the distance under a huge sky. They saw Jack's sister Katie, laughing as she chased her young son through a field of tall grass. They saw the family farm, not modern or high-tech, just a simple house with a porch where you could sit and watch the sunset. They felt the warmth of Sunday dinners, the comfort of home, the simple peace of belonging somewhere. They felt Jack's loneliness when he'd left Earth, the way he'd been searching for something he couldn't name while working jobs across the galaxy. And they felt the moment in Chamber 7 when he'd sat down with his lunch, not expecting anything, just wanting a quiet place to eat and think about whether to spend his savings to go to Katie's wedding. The images faded. The council members looked shaken, some wiping their eyes. That's what Ash wants, Jack said quietly. Not a laboratory or a chamber. A home. Space to grow and fly. People who care about it without wanting to study or use it. A life, not an existence. The debate that followed was different than before. The anger had gone out of it, replaced by genuine wrestling with a difficult question. If they forced Jack and Ash to stay, they'd be doing exactly what they claimed to stand against. But letting them go felt like losing control of something precious and potentially dangerous. Rebecca was the one who proposed the solution. What if we compromise differently, she suggested. Let Jack and Ash go to Earth, but establish a research outpost nearby. A small team that can observe and document Ash's development, but from a distance. Jack would cooperate with the research, allow regular check-ins, but wouldn't be required to live at the archive or keep Ash confined. That could work, another council member said slowly. Would need agreements in place, protocols for communication, safety measures. And the research team would have to be people who understand what Dr. Shale discovered. Claire spoke up suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She blushed but continued. About treating Ash as a companion, not a subject. The observers would need to respect that boundary. Would you be willing to accept those terms, Mr. Cooper? Corval asked. Jack thought about it. It wasn't perfect freedom, but it was better than being trapped at the archive. And honestly, he understood their concerns. Ash was growing powerful. Having some connection to the galactic scientific community might be smart, as long as they weren't trying to control everything. On one condition, Jack said. I get to approve who comes to Earth as observers. I won't have people around Ash who see it as a test subject or a weapon. More debate followed, but eventually, they reached an agreement. Jack and Ash would return to Earth. A small research station would be established in orbit, with a ground team of no more than 5 individuals. Jack would have veto power over team members. In exchange, he'd provide regular updates on Ash's development and allow the researchers access for non-invasive observation and documentation. Claire volunteered immediately to be part of the ground team. I've been studying the cultural and historical aspects of dragons anyway, she said. And someone needs to make sure the scientists remember what Dr. Shale taught us. Rebecca also volunteered, despite having spent 17 years at the archive. I started this research, she said simply. I want to see where it goes. The remaining 3 positions were filled by carefully vetted individuals, a xenobiologist who specialized in non-invasive observation techniques, a cultural liaison from the Veshtar who approached the assignment with appropriate reverence but not obsession, and surprisingly, a young Krithani scholar who'd been mentored by General Vokrith but had a very different philosophy about dragons than his teacher. 3 weeks later, Jack stood in the cargo bay of a transport ship, watching as Earth grew larger in the viewport. Ash stood beside him, the dragon's head nearly reaching Jack's shoulder now. The dragon's wings were strong enough to achieve short flights now, though nothing like what they'd eventually be capable of. Nervous? Claire asked, coming to stand on Jack's other side. Terrified, Jack admitted. I left Earth 3 years ago to get away from small-town life. Now I'm coming back with a dragon. Katie's going to lose her mind. Your sister's farm has 300 acres, right? That should give us plenty of room to roam. Yeah, until it gets bigger than the barn. They both laughed. The transport began its descent through Earth's atmosphere. Jack felt his heart pounding. This was really happening. He was going home, and he was bringing with him a creature out of legend, a dragon that had waited 500 years for someone to simply talk to it like a friend. As the ship landed in a field near Katie's farm, Jack saw his family waiting. Katie was there with her husband Tom and their 5-year-old son Danny. They stood a safe distance back, staring with wide eyes as the cargo ramp lowered. Jack walked down first, then gestured for Ash to follow. The dragon moved cautiously, taking its first steps on Earth soil. It looked around at the open sky, the mountains in the distance, the endless fields of grass and wheat. Ash spread its wings wide and made a sound like joy itself given voice. Danny broke away from his parents and ran forward. Katie shouted for him to wait, but the boy was already approaching Ash with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Are you a dragon? He asked, tilting his head back to look up at Ash's face. Ash lowered its head down to the boy's level and made a gentle chirping sound. Danny giggled and carefully reached out to touch Ash's nose. The dragon's eyes closed contentedly. Jack felt tears on his face, but he was smiling. This was right. This was what Ash had chosen. Not power or prestige or scientific advancement. Just a quiet farm, a family, a home. A chance to be more than a mystery to solve or a weapon to wield. A chance to simply be. Katie came up beside him, putting her arm around his shoulders. So, she said, watching Danny make friends with a dragon. This is going to take some explaining. Yeah, Jack agreed. It is.